Okay, Dan Hanganu, a Romanian architect born in 1939 and died in 2017, 6 years ago, exactly on this day, the 5th of October. He chose to live and work in Canada, though, and that's where he built all his buildings. When he died exactly 6 years ago, on the 5th of October, it was written in the media in Montreal en deuil de l'architecte Dan Hanganu. This is not a little thing. An important city like Montreal paid homage to this architect and explicitly. There is a website where there are several websites where you can find information about this architect. And he was considered an incorrigible optimist. Let's read a little bit about him. Just a second, please. So Dan Sergiu Hanganu, he was born, just a second, because something is blocking the view of the first line. On January 27th, 1939, and died on October 5th, 2017, was a Romanian-born Canadian architect. Based in Montreal, Quebec, he designed a number of prominent Quebec buildings, including the new wing of the Pointe-à-Calière Museum, the HEC Montreal building, the concert hall of Rimouski, the UKAM Design School, and several other mixed-use commercial, residential, and cultural buildings in Montreal, Europe, and Asia. I don't know about any buildings he built in Europe and Asia, but this could be my not knowing. I only know his works built in Canada. Hanganu was the recipient of an impressive list of awards and publications, including the Order of Canada, the Governor General's Award, and was also awarded the RAIC Gold Medal in 2008 for lifetime achievement. Dan Hanganu died on October 5th, 2017 in Montreal, Canada. He wrote this, that the discourse about architecture as a cultural phenomenon. And I would agree with him, and this coincides almost literally with what Alvar Aalto said, that architecture belongs to culture, not to civilization. So we should reflect on this, that architecture is a cultural phenomenon. Cultural. Going back to descriptions of him after he died, un monument québécois. He was considered a monument from Quebec, a human monument. Un monument québécois, littéralement, c'est éteint le jeudi 5 octobre. L'architecte Dan Hanganu, impressionnant par sa stature et par son œuvre, est décédé à l'hôpital où il se trouvait depuis quelques semaines. Il avait, let me see if I can remember in French, 78 ans. So a monument from Quebec, literally died on Thursday, and interestingly, today is also Thursday, the 5th of October. The architect Dan Hanganu, impressive through his stature and his oeuvre, his work, died in the hospital where he found himself for several weeks. He was 78 years old. I love this picture with Dan Hanganu. I mean, I do, because you know, it is romantic. It looked like a, you know, a melancholy man, somehow a romantic man. I love his winter coat. It's a great picture of Dan Hanganu. Most surely the picture was taken in Romania before he left Romania. And here he was in his office in Montreal, romantic itself as well. I never saw pictures of his office. I never saw his collaborators. maybe he worked often as a consultant, or I don't know. I never saw an image of an office, of him. But what I see here, I do like very much. So he was probably a romantic soul. Now we begin the journey through his work with this very important work by Dan HANGANU, Pointe Calier Museum from 1990-1992. This is a picture of an old building that existed here. So he built in lieu of this building. This picture is maybe from I don't know, at the end of the 19th century. And this is what he built. You are going to see better pictures of it. The plan. It's a museum about the archaeology of Montreal, the beginnings of the city in a way. So a very important building. And this is the model of the building with a rather interesting and maybe disputable canopy here. Usually you think about a canopy to protect you from rain and snow and so on, but look how far away it is from the floor, from the ground floor. An interesting accent, so to speak. Maybe not very functional. The interior is, I think, better than a work by Peter Zumthor, which has a similar function. And again, my presentation probably has some weak points. I should correct it. These are the plans. By the way of the plans, I would say that he was not shy to place towards the facade, towards the street, even toilets, if I'm not mistaken, here. I know that. Sorry, I don't know what I did here. Yeah, I pressed something wrong. Sorry. It's getting dark sooner, and I have to turn on the light because I'm not seeing what I'm pressing here on the keyboard. Okay, so I hope I can correct this because I'm a little bit intimidated by the. Just a second. It's terrible, forgive me. Anyway, I came back to it. This was the model. You saw it, the interior of this museum with the beginnings of the history of Montreal, sketches, preliminary sketches for the building. But you can imagine the emotion he had, working on this project, because he was an immigrant. He came from Romania to Canada and had the chance, to work on such an important project and have it built. Pointe Calier, not bad. I see some echoes from a certain work by James Sterling in London here. I also see some echoes from postmodernism. I also wonder, you see these spikes here. They don't seem to be quite. I don't know what their function is, but they also don't seem to be quite perpendicular on the horizontal surface. Anyway, they are there. And I regret that my presentation is a little bit problematic. Well, I think later in the presentation, I will talk again about this important work by him. I began the presentation with it, and then I felt that I should dwell more on it. So I think we'll have more images about this work, and we'll analyze it better later, if I'm not mistaken. I am not insisting on this drawing. I usually start my presentations with renderings and drawings, with drawings. So I came across this drawing, which intrigues me a little bit, because you see he drew, the architecture in a certain way, the way architects do. But then he problematize the clarity of the drawing by the impulsiveness of the gestural graphics, and you wonder why. Well, maybe because he felt that architecture, when it's too defined, is not sufficiently good, and I would agree with him. And that's what I try to say, and maybe I didn't express myself very well when we talked about Mayalin, or that the chapel, the last one that I showed, which was a little bit too defined. Architecture has to be defined, but also has to be somehow elusive. So then you have the balance between l'esprit de géométrie and l'esprit de finesse, the spirit of geometry and the spirit of fineness. Now, I show an earlier work by him from 1982 to 1984 with housing. It's a good work, but you can see the influence of postmodernists here, and maybe even some influence via Mario Botta. He had an appetite for theater, and he did some works for theater, and he even designed some very theatrical chairs. But you look here at this cut into the wall, and particularly this column here, which is certainly not necessary for, this corner doesn't need this column here in order to stand. It's a theatrical gesture, and he also repeats it here. It's a little, manneristic accent. I don't know how else to describe it, but he succeeds in creating a window that is more complex. It's a window that is not quite a window in some cases, not always. Again, the appearance of this column. I think this kind of column is dangerous because it allows historicism to step in a little bit too explicitly, and or maybe it's my rigidity that talks now. But you wonder, between this column and the articulation of spaces and the way he builds the walls, if there is really a connection, even, the column seems to be a little bit off from my point of view. But the influence of postmodernism, when I mentioned Mario Botta at the time, is kind of explicit. And this rendering, this drawing, this study that he did, you see here these two columns, which are also, but we can think about it. Maybe Voltaire was right that the superfluous or superfluousness should be given some space in our works and in our life. Yeah, these are the drawings, handmade, hand-drawn, of course, of Dan Hanganu. There was, prefabrication, as you can see, at a very convincing level. You wouldn't expect, and you wonder even more what that column has to do with the procedure of actually building this complex of row houses. Yeah. But there are interesting things here happening. The interstitial spaces, well, even the tactility, the tectonics of the walls, the entrances into the buildings. I hope to have here some images. But the plans are as they are. They are not particularly striking or surprising. I wish I had another picture. There was a picture and I thought I included it. Here, this one, for example, you know, it's this interstitial space between the buildings, which I think is very important. You know, it's because it separates two houses and it also unites them. So it's an interstitial space. And I think the in-betweenness is very important for architecture and thus interstitial spaces. Okay, the Dorchester Galleria, 1987. This is a project. I only have this image. You know, Galleria meaning it's, you know, some kind of a commercial tall building that he wanted to work on with an emphatic sun there in the sketch. I don't know very well what to think about that. The drawing itself, yes, is very clear. Is maybe too clear. I have a tendency to be sensitive to the drawings, and when I look at the sketch and I look the way he drew the trees, and I look the way he represented the sun, and even the car. Not that the car is as important as the sun, far from it. But you see, he takes into consideration the noise of the car. There is, you know, rather, I don't know how to say. Anyway, I better not go into this too much. Falatis Hotel, 2005, another sketch by him. Espace 400 Pavilion, 2006, 2008. Sorry about this whitish drawings. This is the building. And it's a building which I admire. I like very much. What I don't like about it is that it has a lot of glass. And we know Canada is not Africa. It's not a very warm country. And I think excessive usage of glass, of course, they have the money to pay for air conditioning, for artificial heating. But I think the aesthetics of the building and the way the building came into being is a little bit ignoring the climate of this country. It's a northern country, no? It's cold there. So this is the only reservation I have. I like the fact that you see he employs some kind of ornamentation on the glass, so there is variety. And at night is also, you know, a pleasing building, but again, you know, so much glass in a cold country like Canada. I personally wouldn't do something like this. You would expect in a country like Canada to have less glass, but it's true. Glass is one of the kings or queens of today's world, you know, and its demagogy seduces everybody. Glass, glass, and glass again. But you see here, this building cannot function without excessive pumping of artificial energy. It's clearly not a sustainable architecture, but it is a pleasing architecture, well conceived, well articulated, well everything except, in my opinion, the excessive usage of glass. The interior, yeah. It's also interesting that Dan HANGANU was aware of the dangers of having glass without some kind of ornamentation attached to it. And you see on the picture on the left, it's not stained glass, but it's still a glass which has some kind of treatment. So this I think is a good aspect of this work. You don't see it so well. I mean, maybe he didn't employ the same method on all sides of the building. He was also not afraid to balance, you know, the regularity of structure with more freely and capriciously used elements, like you see here, even at certain angles. So there is a, an affirmative gesture here towards a certain kind of freedom, as opposed to here, where the Malians are, parallel, and there is a more strict geometry, Cartesian. Here is a different system. So again, he was attempting a certain complexity in his architecture, and this is a good thing. Now, this is see, I mentioned his um, openness towards theatricality, and I even, because I met him actually at the School of Architecture here in Bucharest, and he entered the office of the president of the university, and he told us the story that if I remember correctly, on the airport, there was some kind of altercation, and there was a policeman and a female police. There was a policewoman whom he described as being so short that she was actually shorter than the leg of the policeman, the male policeman, from the knee down. I mean, of course, this is impossible, but it showed his appetite for theater, and for the funambulesque and the hallucinatory. And yes, and the chairs also show an appetite. These are not really chairs to sit on, they are chairs to look at. This one also, it's very theatrical, and in a way, not quite functional. No, it's more like a piece of stage design, or yeah, surrealist gesture, or this lamp. So this aspect of Dan HANGANU, I think, is worth mentioning. His appetite for theater, for a playfulness which is not, drastically affected by functionalism, or afraid of functionalism, and so on. Look at this chair also. It's modern, but it's also postmodern. It's also a little bit baroque, and it's playful. There is a level of playfulness here, maybe a high level of playfulness. Or this one, and look at this chair. Why not? Well, what about this one? So there was an artist in him. Yes, these sitting objects are the works of an artist. He also designed cutlery, because, of course, architects do this, especially at that time. Architects enjoy to do all kinds of. Personally, I'm not so seduced by this, because the folkish element, probably the influence coming from the ornamental folk design of his native country is a little bit, in my opinion, too obvious. Another lamp, where again the the playfulness of the the natural the cable is not is not hidden, is left apparent, and is just freely hanging there. So it's a lamp which is not pretentious, and that's a good thing. Now we arrive at an important building in in the campus of an important I'm sorry, university. McGill Law is the McGill Law Library, and you'll see the building. So it's a law library. Maybe this triangle, I don't know if it is. Let's see. It looks like a triangle with all sides equal. I guess it's supposed to symbolize justice, no? And I think it's a good symbol. I am not so sure about these two. He seems to have a problem sometimes with these little columns, you know, roundish columns, like here also, affecting the justice of the equilateral triangle, giant as it is. I like more the elevation, this elevation, the side elevation of the building, which is more, you know, surprising. But this one with this giant triangle, and I don't know. I like the giant triangle. I like the idea of the equilateral triangle. What I don't like, if I am to express myself, not like a critic of architecture, and I am not a critic of architecture. I'm too subjective and idiosyncratic. I don't like these two little columns here, which could have been avoided, I think. Anyway, uh, otherwise the interior is alarmingly whitish and luminous, as if things are so easy, you know. He did this in other works, and we are going to see them. I like the word there, rêver, to dream. I imagine he had something to do with this, but I don't know if it's really the law library when one is supposed to dream too much. Um, anyway, this is um, the chapel of learning and dreaming in the law library designed by Dan Hanganu. But wait a minute, something is wrong. I think it might be now. This, sorry, I'm disappointed because this is not the library of the law. It's not the law library. It's this one where he transformed a church into a library. I was surprised because it was too whitish, considering that that's how the building is, and we saw the interior here. Yes, I apologize. I should have had this building named, and this image is from this building. It is a library, but it's a church, and maybe that's why I called it the Chapel of Learning. I anticipated. It was a church that he transformed into a library. And I like very much the roofing on the right. But again, I have a problem, a personal problem with this extensive usage of glass, and you see the snow. So it's clear when you see this image, you see that the building is functioning because of substantial pumping of artificial energy, that is heat. And I think, in my opinion, Dan Hanganu didn't consider sufficiently well the climate he was building in. Otherwise, the building, but I don't know, I like the silhouette very much. It has a certain, I mean, it has the sacredness of the previous function. It was a church, but I don't know. It's a little bit too pure and too white. Um, I wish I had other pictures. Sorry about this, but it is an important work by him. This church transformed into a library. Um, as I said, um, the right side of the building in this picture is, I think, inspiring and sculptural and still pure and opaque enough for such a cold climate. But the one on the left, in my opinion, is problematic. This one. This is my opinion. Anyway, we move forward with the works of Dan Hanganu. I see here also some echoes from Japanese architecture, certain Japanese architecture. And when I say this, I remember, of course, that I do have three Japanese magazines. The Japan architect that I bought from a second-hand bookstore in Bucharest, which belonged to him because they have the stamp saying Dan HANGANU architect. He probably brought them to someone in Bucharest as a gift, and that someone, when ran out of money, sold them for almost nothing to a bookstore, and they fell in my hands. Anyway, a church. A church. In an interesting way, the library looks more like a church than the church. But it is a good building. It's in a way predictable. You know, it's modern. It's clean. It's whitish. It's a little bit. I don't know how much religious he was, if he was. Not because he adopted a modern vocabulary, architectural vocabulary, but the way he employed it. Anyway, Théâtre du Nouveau Monde. This is a work I like very much. It is a work. It is a work that is not what usually theaters do. You know, they stand out as exceptional works, as referential works, works of magnitude, of incredible aesthetical interest. And like most theaters, they want to stand out, no? And I like the modesty of the work here. He operated with an existing building. Maybe here there was some inspiration, positive inspiration coming from Scandinavia, which doesn't have a need for emphatic gestures. Although here there is something that is emphatic, and is the only negative thing that I could look at, as these very thick columns here. But they didn't need to be so thick, and they are so kind of black, and they support almost nothing. I mean, a very thin, horizontal roofing. The stair is very nice. Is romantically distorted a little bit. There is also the superfluousness of this enclosure here. All in all, it's a little urban theater that I think is well done. And it's well done because it's not pretentious, with the exception, as I said, of those two rather imposing or thick cylindrical columns. But otherwise, there is variety. It's a hybrid building. And its hybridity, I think, breathes well with the city. It was an existing building there that he modified, and he created this theater of the new world. I think it's a very good work by Dan HANGANU. It's like a cultural mechanism that has an urbanity that is not crushing, is not demagogical, is not rhetorical, and this is not easy to do. Théâtre du Nouveau Monde, the theater of the new world. Unafraid to, I mean, how many theaters in the world have something like this? Like, one floor, little, parts of the building, very much at the scale of the passers-by. So again, it's not a crashing building. It's not a building that, is emphatic. And this is a quality. Its modesty is a quality. Again, with the exception of those two rather imposing columns. Here he is, receiving one of his many awards. And I read that he was very fond of the fact that he received an award for architecture in the company of only artists. So because many architects aspire towards, being artists, and some get closer to that and some less close, of course you feel good when your work is honored in a context where artists are. I imagine the person on the left and the person on the right were artists. I read something like this, that he was the only architect who was honored uh, in a ceremony that honored artists. The HEC Montreal building. This is a building I read, comments that were not all enthusiastic. I think he worked as a consultant here for, anyway, it's a large building, as you can see. And it has some qualities, again, coming from the side of theater. It's a science building, but look again here, like these columns here. These columns are rhetorical. This one in particular, it supports nothing. So the capriciousness of the architect is allowed to function and to manifest itself, and I think this is a good thing. I also like, because this kind of elevation could have made very easily a symmetrical um, architectural gesture very, very possible. But he betrayed symmetry in the name of life, and that's a good thing. In a rendering he did, you see, he still struggled. Well, he struggled. He proposed something else, but in the same attempt to avoid a rigid symmetry, and I think it was a good aspiration. The Pre-Paul Mill Bourgeois is an awards program that recognizes the contributions of artists. We already saw a picture. From what I understand, I was the only practicing architect to receive this award. The prize acknowledged the idea that an architect can be an artist. And I would say that yes, can, when the architect is very good. Bank Street Building, 2003. Sorry about this whitish building. This is a project which was not realized. This was his proposal. I hope there is a rendering. Let's see. Yeah, here you see he proposed between this existing building and this existing building. He proposed this one. Well, it was not built, but maybe it would have been interesting if it was, but it was not built. Probably offices, an office building, or was it with apartments? That might have been possible too. Bank Street building. Doesn't look like a bank. Here again, the superfluousness of the theatrical gesture shows up again, and it shows that architecture should embrace also what Voltaire called the superfluous. The roofing here, the top part, the coiffure of the building, let's see, you see here, is it's not truly functionalist at all. But then the old buildings have the same theater at the top. So, indeed, the coiffure of the building is important. And it's enough to contemplate pictures with the famous Chambord castle to know that it is so. So the transition between the terrestrial and the celestial through the roof of the building in an emphatic and artistically pleasing way is probably not an error. Because you see in these old buildings, in fact, the most emphatic architectural part of the buildings is exactly at the top of the building. Well, in his own way, Dan HANGANU tried the same thing. Otherwise, the buildings are, prismatic, but at the top, something happens. Now, is it a good interpretation of what the old buildings had? That remains to be discussed. But the attempt was there. It was not built. It was not built. The Benedictine monastery in Saint Bernard du Lac, Quebec, abbatial church of Saint Bernard du Lac, 1994. Here, I would say it is a little bit unfortunate, the echo of postmodernism, but he was decent about it, as opposed to so many architects who were truly victimized by the effects of postmodernism on architecture. And I would include here even Dan Coma, who did an absolutely terrible building around in the early 90s in Japan. In a moment of maliciousness, I wrote actually that based on that building, at least for a number of years, the license to practice architecture should have been taken away from Dan Coma. Dan HANGANU didn't make such mistakes, no. But the architecture is a little bit static, in my opinion, and a little bit too predictable in its aesthetics. But there are still good things here. The modern stained glass windows. Obviously, Dan HANGANU had an artist in him and welcomed art. Yeah. Kenneth Frampton told me that Dan HANGANU, he was friends with Dan HANGANU, told him that he would have liked to actually practice architecture in the United States, perhaps in New York City, because he thought that somehow he would have been able to make a more, acknowledged architecture in New York. And Kenneth told him, no, it's a good thing you worked and lived in Canada. And I think Kenneth Frampton was right. It's very possible that in a city like New York City or in a country like the United States, Dan HANGANU would not have had the accomplishments he had in Canada. And I'm saying this because I lived in New York City for many years, and it's a different environment. It's very commercial and very aggressively competitive. And now I think the gods were kind with Dan HANGANU when they directed him to go to Canada. In this case, for the kind of man, an artist, an architect he was. Anyway, a rendering by Dan HANGANU, a section also rendered by Dan HANGANU with colored pencils, a detail, a fragment of the building. It was an existing building here. He only operated within the existing building. The Museum of Archaeology and History, and this is how we started our journey through his work. Now we continue that journey, and sorry about this not optimal placing of the presentation of these works, of this work in particular. So you remember, we already talked a little bit about it. So its function, the Museum of Archaeology and History in Montreal, a very important work. Again, I find it curious that he placed this canopy, which is supposed to protect you from rain and snow, at such a height. obviously doesn't function. But it's interesting, maybe exactly because of its capricious position within the building, and it shows that he was not the slave of function. And across the street, he built, in my opinion, one of his best buildings, and we are going to see it very soon. So this is the Museum of Archaeology and History of the city of Montreal. In Montreal is this building that was also designed by him. And I like it more than some other buildings by him, even more than this one, although this one is more imposing and rhetorical, and in terms of function, more so-called important. But this one, more modest, in my opinion, is maybe even better, with the exception of, in my opinion, this extensive usage of glass, which, anyway, I guess he liked glass. He didn't use so much glass, though, here. From this point of view, this building is superior. La Maison des Marins in Montreal, this is the building, and I like very much. So it's across the street from the previous building. I like very much so here he worked again with an existing building. So I hope I have pictures of the old, let's see. Yes, here, you see, this was the existing building, and this is how he transformed it. And certain things he continued to use, like the windows, but then he introduced, a different kind of window in the corner. Then here he played differently. He created a certain complexity on the facade of the building. And I like very much this canopy. Again, it's like it's a rhetorical gesture, but I think it works very well architecturally, because it's not really necessary what he did there. So in a certain way, he approved John Ruskin, who said the most beautiful things in the world are the most useless. Well, what is the role of this canopy at that height? I don't know. I can't imagine having an obvious role, a functional role. But that dislocation there at the top of the building, I think it's a good thing, and it's clearly capricious. It's more like a sign in a way that it's close to it's the corner of the building, and it's becoming wider towards the corner of the building, but it doesn't really have a function. No, it is an interesting work, and you see it here too. And you wonder about that thing, why did he do it so? Again, not everything can be explained or explainable in architecture. Certain things you do because you feel like doing them. So, but it's true, you have to know where to stop. But this kind of works, like this one, or like that theater, the theater of the New World in Montreal, also, I think he was very good at working with existing conditions and with modifications, with alterations done to existing buildings, like he did here. So the hybridity and the playfulness of his temperament, character, maybe intellect, worked well with such conditions. It's not an imposing building, and this is a quality, in my opinion. If you compare the existing building on the left with the building he did on the right, I think he added something to the building without totally betraying the previous building. the existing building. No, it is, in other words, there is innovation and continuity. There is continuity and break at the same time. And this, I think, is a noble goal in architecture, to obtain both continuity and innovation, or continuity continuity and the break. So I guess it does pay to be playful in a measured way, not excessively. Here you see from this building the other building that he built, the Museum of History and Archaeology. The Anglican Theatre in Quebec, 1990, 2003. Sorry about these pictures. This is a sketch he did. And, you know, he transformed a church. We saw the transformation of a church into a library. And in this case, we see the transformation of a little church into a theater. And I like very much the redness of sensuality that he brought into the theater that previously was a church. So, you know, you have both that, because the church remained, I mean, the building towards the outside, obviously, you look at it and you say it's a church. Well, it is a church. The cross was kept there, but inside we see something else altogether. It's not the redness of blood, although it could be interpreted in this way too. It's the redness of passion, is the redness of eros, is the redness of theater. Maybe that redness in some kind of a dialectical interplay with the greenness of this magnificent tree outside of the former church. Not bad. A very accomplished architect, and we should be proud of him. Cirque du Soleil headquarters, Montreal. A very famous circus, Cirque du Soleil. This is their headquarters in Montreal. Initially, I didn't like very much this facade because it's so blank, you know, it's so opaque and so big. But you know, it's a container, it's a box, and it's a box within which you don't quite know what it is. So it's a circus there. Well, it's the headquarters. And then there is the playfulness that you discover, the, you know, the ornamental playfulness of certain elements. Not in a, you know, very exuberant way. Maybe it's enough. Maybe the circus itself is symbolized through these four circles. That's it. And then there is, yes, the capricious interplay of some differently colored rectangles, nothing else. And then on the other side, you see this. It's, you know, it's a large building for a very successful institution, Cirque du Soleil. Yes, he loved the theater. The School of Design, University of Quebec at Montreal, 1995. By the way, Dan HANGANU didn't seem to like very much acrobats, although we just saw work done for the Cirque du Soleil, because he wrote that he liked an architecture done by athletes, not by acrobats. And in this, he situated himself. I don't know if you know, if he knew of a small poem written by Le Corbusier, whose birthday will be tomorrow, about the acrobat and called The Acrobat. I know that poem from from B.V. Doshi, who worked with Le Corbusier. Le Corbusier apparently admired the acrobat because the acrobat did things other people couldn't do and didn't even think of doing. While Dan HANGANU thought that the acrobat is rather frivolous, and by comparison, he admired the athlete. I think he was also perhaps a little bit jealous of, the fantastic acrobacies of what later was to be known deconstructivism, and even later the adventures of fluidities and so on. I don't know, but he had an acrobat in him too. If we look even in this building at this, we don't know exactly what it is, but again, it doesn't seem to have a very explicit function. I don't know what it is. It's some kind of a giant pergola at the top. Anyway, as you can see, he built some big buildings for important institutions, and in a city which has had and has and will have other important architects. I like the fact that he employed various forms of windows. You see, here is the curtain wall, and then here you have, so-called traditional windows, small piercings of the wall, and here again another type of large-scale glass. So he was a complex architect who was not inhibited, and who tried to bring together various architectural devices, so to speak, including within the same work. Here I see some echoes from a certain Japanese architecture. Now that I know that, he had subscriptions to Japanese architecture magazines, a certain touch of postmodernism I see a little bit too explicitly in some of his works. What is this? 2005, 2007. This work disappointed me because I discovered a situation like what is here. You see this metallic element emerging from the wall, extending itself again capriciously. And I am sorry to say it, but I discovered something identical, literally identical, done by what's his name, the Catalan architect. I'm getting old. I'm beginning to have problems with memory. The former husband of late husband of Benedetta Taliabue. Funnily, I remember her name, Eric Miralles. And I even sent the two pictures of with what Miralles did and what Dan HANGANU did to Kenneth Frampton to show him. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but hard to think that it was just a coincidence. Anyway, again, we see here a gesture, an architectural gesture, which is clearly betraying the austerity, the commandments of an austere functionalism. This thing, certainly for functional reason, didn't have to extend so much here. It's that superfluous thing that I think Voltaire was right, claiming that should be allowed and even encouraged. Because otherwise the building is rather, predictable. But all of a sudden, an accident, an accent, an irrational gesture, if you want. You see it here. It is important. This little thing, it might be more important than the whole building. I think. Jean Briand Pavilion 2013. I like this building very much. I showed it to a friend of mine, an architect in Austria, and he said, yeah, sure, this was done by someone in his office. I don't think so, but you see the influence. When was this done? 2013. Well, deconstructivism and deviance is promoted by deconstructivism were already known for a good number of years. And here we see, but I think it's an excellent pavilion that Dan HANGANU designed. I don't know what its function is, if it has a function, but I think it's done very skillfully. Elgar Community Center, 2002. Another good work where I see the influence of Scandinavian architecture. He seemed to like these cylindrical columns. I don't know. I'm a little bit not so much convinced by them, but otherwise, it's an architecture which could have been built also in a Scandinavian country. There is a certain level of exuberance here, formal exuberance, the playfulness with various elements, the sculpture or the sculptural element that we see on the left side. So you understand now why he was awarded, in a ceremony which awarded artists. La Capitale head office 2012 is that building that you see in the background there with a glass coiffure, if I call it so. I don't know. I mean, this is a corporate building, a lot of glass, a lot of glass, a lot of glass, a lot of whiteness to clean. To what can you do? It's an architecture of predictability and power. And in my opinion, there is a little bit too much superfluousness there at the top. Sorry, Voltaire. And again, I would reiterate that so much glass in a country like Canada is probably disputable. I wish he brought in some, I don't know, bricks, some some materials which were less shiny and glittering and but maybe it was not possible. But on the top of the building, I like very much the way this grass, these unnamed plants, although they are probably named, but I don't know their names. I like the landscaping on the roof, on the terrace of this building. Now, this emphatic sculptural structure at the top, I'm not sure what its function is. Is maybe, again, superfluousness pushed too far. Marc Favreau Library in Montreal, another library, again with a certain duality, architectonic duality. Here again, we see the big, thick, fat, cylindrical column. And we see here again a lot of glass, but it's frosted glass, or anyway, he treated it in a certain way. So it's, it evokes somehow ice, considering that it's an old, cold country. And let's see what else. I like here also the fact that he doesn't turn his back on ornament. So ornament is inscribed in the facade, and you can you'll see a picture from the inside. Let's see where it is. Yeah, you see it here too. And he anticipated actually courageously a trend that now is very obvious. Snoheta, for example, uses, but they are not the only ones. He uses a lot, ornamentation, not in a very dissimilar way from what Dan Hanganu did here. Again, glass, glass, and glass again. And when you look at the snow and you don't know that there is air conditioning, you feel like trembling for the people inside. But the people inside don't tremble, of course, because Canada has the money to pump heat into this glass box. I still debate Dan Hanganu in this, there's so much glass in this kind of climate. He could have been a little bit more, a little bit more attentive with the pocket of the clients. The interior is, what can we say, a civilized, decent, pleasant interior, but it's not very eventful architecturally, with the exception of that ornamental treatment of the glass there. I feel like chopping this fat, cylindrical, predictable by now in his oeuvre column here. Is a signature element. Anyway, another library, another duality in the work of Dan Hanganu, because you see this building here is treated in a certain way and this one in a completely different way, just like in that, in other works he did. Otherwise, the atmosphere seems to be nice here. Lots of people in the library as opposed to our library in our school. What is this, a failed project? I could tell you, I end the presentation now in a very personal way, but related to Dan Hanganu. So we are at the very end of the presentation. About almost 20 years ago, I bought this building at the frontier between the United States and Canada for $2,000 at an auction on eBay. And I liked very much this building. And I was very proud of my acquisition. To buy such a building upstate New York, really 1 hour and a quarter, 1 hour and 15 minutes by car from Montreal. But it was in the United States, upstate New York. So I didn't see it before I entered the auction. I won the auction. I bought the building, and I wanted to make it a center for experimental architecture. And this building, which used to be a factory for sausages, 600 square meters, so was rather large. It looked okay from the outside, and even more from the river. This river was called the Salmon River. So I fantasized that you could fish salmon from inside the building. I liked very much its romanticism. I liked very much the fact that the building was between, on the left, the river, and in fact actually was cantilevered above the river, and on the right the road, and then above the sky and underneath the earth. Well, why am I showing you this building? Because before Dan Hanganu died, I contacted him, me being in Bucharest, and I said to him, I have this property very close to Montreal, and he was in Montreal. And I said, we could build there a building. a building for the study of art, architecture, a small cultural center. And would you be interested to be the architect and maybe even the developer? Because he was doing well, obviously, with so many buildings built. And he did express an interest. He did tell me that he was interested in it. Unfortunately, he was ill and he didn't feel very well. That's what he wrote me. And he also had some kind of litigation, some kind of a judicial problem, in the court. But he didn't say no. He liked, I think he liked the building, and who wouldn't, and the whole situation. And it was just 5 miles away from a spectacular falling water, and 8 miles away from how to call it, a winter resort area. And it was between the United States and Canada, and very close to Montreal, because when I went to visit it after I bought it, all of a sudden the music changed from English music or American music to French music, and the news were in French, and so we are very close to Canada. Unfortunately, to end this short story, this building proved to be the victim of a terrible fire. It was all burnt inside. It needed a huge investment, and I was never a rich man. I couldn't do it. And I was the proud owner of this rather interesting building for a number of years, until the city of Malone, upstate New York, where it was positioned, auctioned it again because I didn't pay taxes for, I don't know, 10, 15 years. But that's about it. So that was the presentation on Dan HANGANU today. Thank you for being present here.